The Shadow Curse lands are filled with terrifying threats, but also unique investment opportunities. So to grow his generational wealth, our covetous champion will have to evict the impoverished tenants, use his skills to negotiate with the local landlords, investigate the nearby cult for his patron, and pray his very own curse doesn't catch up to him. Thus continues the legend of Gunter Gumli III. But first, if you haven't already, go check out the last video here, and if you like what you see, please like and subscribe. It goes a long way to helping out. With that out of the way, on to the video. As our gallant adventurer continues on, we arrive in the Shadow Curse lands, and it's surprisingly a wee bit dark here. So we pop on a ring we got earlier that lets us cast a light to make sure nothing foul sneaks up on us while we're unaware. In fact, we end up sneaking up on something foul ourselves, the common folk. While we're chatting to each other, a sentient shadow gets the jump on one of them, and for better or worse, a fight kicks off with them on our side. We're up first, and we've still got our Bless and Bloodlust elixir from the last act active, so we're feeling pretty good as we get blasting on the nearest shadow. The rest of the round goes by with our temporary meat shields trading blows with the shadow monsters. And when it gets back to us, we show off our haste spell, as well as our ability to get crits galore, both misses and hits. Thankfully, first blood goes to Team Gumli as one of the Harpers takes out a shadow. On our next turn, we fire up the Gatling gun. Our first blast doesn't kill anyone. Our second blast, however, does, triggering our elixir, which lets us get one more as well. Though our bodyguards aren't doing nearly as well as we are, as the first of them falls. Either way, Gunter's life is certainly worth more, evidenced by the fact that we take out not one but two of the three remaining shadows when we get the chance, causing the remaining one to strike back with vengeance-fueled strength that takes out half our health in one fell swoop. Still, we manage to get the reanimated Harper, though he dies to reverberation, so no elixir proc for us. And to keep ourselves humble and the fight nail-biting, our curse gives us one more crit miss on the remaining shadowy specter. However, there's no need to be nervous as it misses us, and we take it out easy peasy in return. The Harpers are sufficiently amazed by our noble bearing and mark our map with a safe location, and even if it's a peasant-filled pigsty, until we can find Moonrise, it's as good a place as any. Sure enough, right down the road is the place we're looking for, and even with the peon we've saved vouching for us, yet another dirty druid bars our path. She thinks we're with the Cult of the Absolute just because of a parasite in our head. But before things get too out of hand, Flaming Fist Marcus shows up to vouch for us as well. He's an actual true soul who thinks we're one as well, so we play along with what he says, and Jaheira is more than convinced by him, granting us free reign at a last light in. Which means we head straight towards Quartermaster Tally and buy the Cloak of Protection. This will be our forever cloak, granting a +1 to both AC and saving throws. Honestly, it's really hard to beat how good this is despite its simple effect. The extra power up is definitely nice, but we're gonna take these people for all they're worth. And before we can do that, we gather as much info as we can from Jaheira, learning that Moonrise is nice nearby and is being ruled by an immortal man named Ketheric Thorm, a leader of the cult and a man our patron wants gone. As we're heading out, we also get told about Isabel, a cleric upstairs who can give us a blessing to help with the Shadow Curse, though with Marcus hanging around, we'll hold off on that for now since we're sure he's got some sort of plot in mind. Instead, we head off to find some valuables where they're always found, underground. There's quite the meanlock infestation waiting for us down here, so we send an invisible shovel in to get the jump on them. While she's keeping them distracted, we drop a Hunger of Adar at a bottleneck and start blasting the closest one, instantly frightening them too. Unfortunately, our Quasit servant goes down right after, but she's served her purpose. And despite being able to teleport, the meanlocks seem to much prefer walking through the Hunger, which is definitely to our benefit. While most of the myriad meanlocks tend to meander about on their turns, one of them actually does teleport outside the Hunger, which means we know exactly who to target on this turn, and since we've got advantage due to their blindness, the crits are rolling in. We also down a speed pod to finish off the first of them, triggering our elixir and letting us blast away even more. So long as we keep this up, there's really not much any of them can do. They can barely even move due to difficult terrain and being frightened. In fact, this whole fight kinda just turns into shooting fish in a barrel, as not one of them manages to stay out of the Hunger, and with no range attacks, they go down without landing a single hit on us. Our reward for this extermination is the Covert Cowl, a helmet that expands our crit range by a further one so long as we're obscured. That means in dim light or darkness. Since both of those are plentiful in Act 2, we'll have no problem keeping this active once we don't need light to resist the Shadow Curse. It also gives a +1 at Dex saves as a treat. With a bit more power in tow, we set off towards Moonrise, alongside a group of willing meat shields who say they've tracked down a cultist convoy that has a way of resisting the Shadow Curse. And along the way, just for exploring, we get enough experience for level 6. This gives us our next subclass feature, Entropic Ward, a reaction that once per short rest lets us impose disadvantage on an attack against us, and if it misses, we gain advantage on our next attack against that creature. It's not great great, but there's nothing wrong with having it. We also get to grab another spell learned in the form of Counterspell, an iconic spell that lets us do exactly as the name suggests. It's not guaranteed against higher level spells, but if we're going to be using spell slots on things other than Hunger of Adar or Darkness, it needs to be impactful, and this one can be a lifesaver. Continuing on, we find the convoy easily enough, being led by a mad, muttering Drider. Since we're trying to get in with the people at Moonrise, we make ourselves known and let the Drider know that there's an ambush about to befall him. Naturally, the Harpers don't take too kindly to that. It is rather refreshing for Gunther to get back to his roots of mowing down the lower classes while making friends with people in positions of power. Once all is said and done, which doesn't take too long, we convince the Drider we're buddies, and he tells us to stay close to his lantern as that's the source of their immunity to the curse, which means that we want that lantern to ourselves. There's no more option to convince him to just hand it over, unfortunately, but that kind of power is definitely better in our hands, so we convince our new pal the old-fashioned way. Our 8-legged opponent zooms over through the Hunger, almost making it out in one go. Gunther goes right after, and we try and take out one of the low-health cronies to trigger our elixir, but we barely don't get there, though he does die from the Hunger on his turn. Strangely enough, the Drider just skips their turn entirely, presumably because they're getting blocked. But this gives us the opportunity to continue blasting folks backwards while we keep our distance. One of them manages to dash pretty far out on their next turn before realizing they're far too impoverished to be near us and jumping back into the Hunger while continuing to body block the Drider. We manage to murk one of them and frighten Karnas in the process, allowing us to blast yet again, and with another crit, frighten another enemy. The next turn goes incredibly similarly, taking out another garish goon and continuing to bully our betrayed bud even further. With the turn after that, Gunther manages to obliterate the last of the small fry, and we spend the next 5 or so turns just blasting the Drider back as it struggles to get out of our spell, until eventually the Hunger wears out, causing the arachnid cultist to come barreling towards us. Unfortunately, the family curse really starts kicking in at this point with a few blasts crit missing, but as long as we keep our health at max, this creature can only attack once per turn, which means even if it's narrow, we can avoid getting destroyed. Especially so once we start getting shoves on Karnas to avoid disadvantage on repelling blasts that push him even further, letting us run far enough away that he has to spend his turns dashing to catch up. And since now he's at low health, we bring in a Call Lightning to guarantee the kill. Or not. Okay, now we guarantee the kill. Well, it sucks we won't get extra clout with the Moonrise people, but at least we don't have to deal with those Harpers anymore. We grab the Moon Lantern laying on the ground and find there's a pixie fueling it, so we cut a deal with her to gain immunity to the curse in exchange for her freedom. A more than worthwhile trade since it means we won't have to hear her whining, and our new cowl will be working dandy. Now that we've got a safe way to get there, it's really not hard to just march down the road and arrive at the place to be. Whereupon we enter the main hall and find Minthara awaiting judgment for her failures in Act 1. She has her say and rolls a nat 1 on her persuasion check to convince them to let her live, and so Ketheric Thorm himself passes a harsh but fair judgment. Doubly so for the goblins. And he takes the chance to really assert his dominance when they fail to kill the immortal man to no one's surprise, before he heads upstairs to delegate like any man in charge should, and we get to roam the towers free. Our first stop is Raj Obladra to buy the risky ring. This will be replacing Crusher's ring but grants advantage on all attack rolls as well as disadvantage on all saving throws. Obviously, this is a big trade-off where we lose defense for offense, but with perma advantage, the crits will come rolling in, and so will the Frightens. Then we go upstairs to have a quick little palaver with Zarel, Ketheric's prime delegator. She lets us know there's a job for us, and though we hate doing people's dirty work, it's all for our patron in the end. Apparently, Balthazar, the resident necromancer, has gone AWOL somewhere in the nearby mausoleum looking for an important relic, and we're to go after him. There's a chance this relic could be Ketheric's weakness, so we oblige for now. Elsewhere in the tower, we go snooping for anything we can use against these people and stumble across a mimic in a dilapidated bedroom. After clearing it out, we grab the Spineshudder Amulet from his body. This amulet makes it so whenever we deal damage with a ranged spell attack such as Eldritch Blast, we'll inflict 2 turns of a reverberation as well, increasing the amount we apply this by a ton, making it much more likely enemies will fall prone. And our snooping pays off as we find Ketheric's bedroom with a heartwarming note from his dead wife, a big mistake having emotional attachments, one that we'll be sure to take advantage of. During our investigating, we find a strange hole in the wall, and naturally we stick our hand in it. As a result, due to our capabilities as a warlock, we're pulled into a vision by the Absolute itself. It communicates to us that it is but a slave to those in charge who are controlling it, and we are the only one who can stop them. Now, we know enough to not want to free the Absolute from their control, but it's nice to know how dangerous we are. Before too long, though, the vision ends, and we have to be satisfied with the few answers that we did get. Once all is said and done, we head back to the Last Light Inn where Marcus awaits us so that that we can jump Isabel and take her back to her father, Ketheric Thorm. So we go say hi to her, and she gives us a blessing that grants resistance to magical necrotic damage, which is a very nice thing to do right before we decide to kidnap her. And it's really not hard for us to bring her nice and low, then knock her out with a critical whack to the face. Marcus picks her up and flies away, leaving both Gunter and Jaheira awkwardly stuck in a last light inn that's about to get flooded by shadow-cursed undead. As we're worried about how we'll deal with her, she dies in one single arrow shot on the very first turn of combat, which is very indicative of how fights with her usually go. Now it's time for our favorite little game, standing on the balcony and mowing down peasants by the dozen. In fact, they don't even really try to do anything about it, past just cowering inside of the building. To make things a little more interesting, we show them where the stairs are and then cover them all with a Hunger of Hadar, and then get right back to reaping them like wheat. Before you know it, the last of them goes down and our fun is over, leaving just some boring old plants to finish off. Ah well, there's always more peasants. At least we're now the brand new owner of a beautiful waterside inn. Speaking of owning parts of the town, we set off to claim ownership of the rest of it too, starting with the toll house, where we meet Garen Jouthi Thorm. Regardless of how we pronounce her name, using our incredible negotiation skills, we convinced her that there's a new head honcho in town and she should really just hand over the toll house. She happily obliges and blows herself up, letting us get all the gold our little rotten heart desires. Next on our list of places to acquire is the House of Healing. Unfortunately, the good Dr. Malice Thorm is in the middle of an operation when we arrive. We do our best to convince him to hand over his house, but alas, we fall a little short of the mark and a fight ends up breaking out. Before we can do anything, the doctor whacks us, but we go right after with a Hunger of Hadar in the center of the room and then climb out of his reach, forcing him to go all the way around if he wants to get us. The malicious medical staff all kind of get stuck in the hunger and just skip through their turns, letting us rain carnage down from on high at whoever we can see. Eventually, when it's just one nurse and Malice left, they finally figure it's about time to walk out and chase us down. And then they almost immediately go back on said decision and waste their turns dashing back into horrible places, letting us get the nurse real low so Shovel can come in and finish her off. Meanwhile, the doctor reses a different nurse at the far end of our hunger, and with our elixir of bloodlust we can take her out while still damaging the doctor. This keeps happening over and over, leaving Malice in a perpetual loop where we blast and blast away all 358 of his hit points. Just like that, Gunter becomes the proprietor of yet another blossoming business to be. There's one last place on our list to acquire, the local pub, where surprise surprise yet another Thorm, Thisbald, awaits us. He pours us a foul brew while we discuss him handing over the business to someone more capable, but when we try to fake drinking it, things go south fast and yet another fight kicks off. Our first turn is spent with an Eldritch Blast on the nearest foe while we make as much distance as we can. Unfortunately, the baddies manage to close the gap on their turn, so we're left using another hunger to slow him down and let us walk away without provoking any attacks, while Shovel makes herself known to bar the path for anyone who would get to her master. With her on defense, we get blasting Thisbald himself and get heading towards the exit doorway. The zombie patrons get the best of our boorish bodyguard at this point, but she held the line long enough, especially considering we drop another hunger on the coming turns to keep damaging and kiting the enemies. After a few more turns, we're all outside and we've started picking off the goons one by one, while backpedaling further into the street each turn. As we're doing this though, it gets to the point where Thisbald just kinda stops. Apparently he can't walk past this point, though that's not really the most involved way to take on this fight, so we take out the last zombie, cast haste on ourselves, and then run back into Thisbald's territory. Unfortunately, we don't move far enough and he gets a nasty regurgitation, but despite our disadvantage, we make the concentration save, which means for the rest of the fight, we get to run circles around him while we spam Eldritch Blasts out the wazoo. And in 6 or so rounds, that is the last of our business negotiations done for. Time to triple the price on everything. Speaking of expensive deals, we head to the mausoleum and find Raphael waiting outside in typical condescending fashion. He tries to persuade us to reconsider him becoming our patron by letting us know about a devil that lurks below, one that he really wants dead. The knowledge is good to have, but we don't need anyone who talks down to us in our corner, so we tell him to bugger off and we enter the mausoleum, wherein we find a secret entrance to a Sharan gauntlet by pressing just a few buttons. Upon descending below, we find yet another button-themed puzzle. This one is as simple as approaching from the east and then the south to avoid a couple magical barriers. This lets us continue on to a side passage where we obliterate a cloaker that was lying rather poorly in wait. In the next room after that, we see some sentient skeletons shambling about, so we make sure to pre-buff ourselves with a haste in case something goes awry. Though it seems we were needlessly worried, at least at first, since these are Balthazar's puppets. As we're in the middle of telling him we were sent to help, the room starts shaking and portals start opening, bringing out shadowy undead dark justiciars. Since we went around the side passage, there's a few skeletons that join from the the main passage while we get started on taking out the portals with the help of haste and a bonus action stab. Our short, shrill servant also gets on the case. The Dark Justiciars spend their turns mainly just fighting against the skeletons, and the skeletons vice versa. Unfortunately, more and more umbral tremors appear faster than we can take them out, but it won't stop us from trying, though it is annoying since they can't be crit. To make matters worse, Balthazar's unimpressive undead start to lose the fight at this point as well, and we keep doing our best to take out at least 2 of the tremors each turn before we run out of fodder. A big one spawns in the center next round, and really not wanting to find out what's going to come out of that, we devote all firepower towards taking it out. This routine keeps up for a little while until eventually Shovel is taken out before she's able to take out the portal that she's been working on, which means it actually expires and summons one last Dark Justiciar, making our final initiative order look like this. With a Bloodlust Elixir and haste active, the Gatling gun gets fired up and is fueled with eldritch energy and righteous rage at the mistreatment of our servant. But soon after, the last of our bodyguards lay broken on the ground. So to play it safe on our next turn, after a bit of blasting, we run as far away as we can and then break concentration on haste, instantly ending our turn but making it so we don't have to skip our next one. Also making it so we're less worried when the enemy squad mobilizes and starts landing hits, since we have no concentration to worry about. To buy us another turn, we Misty Step away using a scroll and shut the door so they can't fire on us without opening it first. Basically meaning they all spend their turns dashing on up to us. Relying on the age-old hunger of Adar to keep them at bay, we pass the turn back to them, where Gunter quickly realizes that they can't be blinded, resulting in a broken concentration awfully quick. On our next round, we start thinning them down and granting disadvantage in a much more frightening way before healing up with a potion. Thanks to this, they miss much more often, making us feel a whole lot safer. Though they still land the occasional hit as the fight goes on, but it's nothing our potion supply can't get us through. From here, we just pick them off one by one until they're all dealt with and the cowardly Balthazar pops open the door. Inside, we meet the ne'er-do-well necromancer face to face, and he tells us all about how the relic does indeed bestow Ketheric his invulnerability, confirming our suspicions. We tell him if we're gonna be doing his job for him, he's gonna have to give us some help. He obliges by handing us a bell to summon Flesh, his not-so-little brother. And with that, we set out to the first of Shar's trials that await us, the Soft Step trial. All we need to do is get to the end without being spotted, so we turn on turn-based mode and jump through this window. Then we lockpick the door at the end, and just like that, the first Umbral gem is ours. The next one is the Self-Same trial, wherein we'll fight a clone of ourselves, complete with all of our spells and gear, so naturally we start by taking off said gear. Once inside and our gear's back on, we find a very vulnerable looking Gunter that we sneak up on and get blasting. As you can imagine, he does not last too long at all, and that's Umbral gem number 2 in the bag. Downstairs is the final trial, the Faith Leap trial. This one is easy enough, we just need to get to the end using an invisible pathway, or better yet, hopping our way across that invisible pathway. Making sure to touch down on it before hopping to the end, otherwise we get teleported back to the start. And as easy as taking candy from a commoner, we get our last trial done. While we're here though, we notice a library filled with more Justiciars nearby, and even with the librarian in the center making the whole room silenced, we can still shoot from outside. Strangely enough, this doesn't trigger aggro, and we're able to take one of them out from here, but there's no fun in doing that to all of them, so we send in Shovel to surprise them and start combat. The librarians start spawning in even more Justiciars, which is a little worrisome, but we focus on taking out the ones that we can to trigger our elixir and let us deal even more damage. Even with perma advantage, we can't stop the Goomly curse from causing the occasional crit miss that prevents kills. But after spawning 2 more Justiciars, the librarian vanishes completely, so at least we don't have to worry too much. From here, it plays out pretty similarly to the last fight, with the same enemies unable to deal enough damage to make us really worry, so we just keep them at bay and blast them down one by one till the library is ours to claim, including its content, such as this little book here, and after pressing this button in the northwest corner, we gain access to the locked section, where we put the book we found, opening up yet another hidden area, and it's here we grab the Dark Justiciar helmet and half plate. The helmet grants the same crit expanding feature as the cowl, but gives +1 to con instead of dex, which is a much nicer boost, and to top it off, it also gives a +1 to all saves against spells. The half plate, on the other hand, is something we won't even really be using for the most part, with the exception of one very important fight later on thanks to its advantage on con saves, so keep it in mind. Now that we've got a little boost and the trial's done, we investigate the other side of the gauntlet where we run across Yrgir, an Orthon and the devil Raphael had warned us of. Upon him realizing we're no friend of Raphael, we convince him to sing us his contract, as we're an expert in the matter. We cut a deal with him afterwards, once. We'll make sure his contract is fulfilled if he gives us the last Umbral Gem that we need. Now we've just got to find the last living Justiciar that is no doubt hiding somewhere in this mausoleum. Our big break comes in the form of the rats in this place, who are more than they appear, since they together are the last Justiciar. So we start a fight against all of them. To make sure the rats have something enticing to go after, we summon the world's greatest meat shield and start picking them off one by one. It takes quite a while, but as quick as you can say anti-disestablishmentarianism, Flesh has taken out the last rat and we repay him by granting him a nice extended rest. Once they're all dealt with, the Rat Man is reborn as less rat and more man, and one more little segment to this fight takes place. The poor rambunctious rodent does his best to get us with a couple hits, to no avail, but we certainly don't fail hitting him in turn, sending him down to take loads of fall damage. Next turn he does get a very scary blight on us, but we just repeat blasting him off the edge, and that's Yrgir's contract fulfilled. With that fight done, we also get level 7, upgrading our spell slots to level 4 and letting us choose Misty Step as a new addition. It's a nice bonus action mobility spell that, much like Counterspell, is more or less a last resort, when used with a Warlock spell slot at least. We also get Book of Ancient Secrets as an Eldritch Invocation, letting us use Ray of Sickness, Chromatic Orb, and Silence once per long rest for free. These aren't really incredible spells, but most of the invocations we can get at this level aren't worth much at all, so we'll take what we can. Now it's time for us to return to Yrgir and tell him the good news, but the celebration is short-lived as Raphael shows up to be a Debbie Downer. He lets Yrgir know he's in violation of contract since he himself wasn't the one to do the job, so Raphael whisks him away to his domain to do whatever he wants with him, letting us grab the very last Umbral Gem that we need. Since there's not much left for us to do before we reveal our betrayal to Ketheric and end his immortality, we get purging all the many squatters in our new town, starting with the fishfolk. Not to mention the odd roaming shadow and ooze pits, and of course the avian population needs a good culling, and who can forget a bit of landscaping to really spruce things up. With all that out of the way, it's time to properly prepare for the end, starting by heading to the center of town and hitting the northern, then western, and finally eastern plaques on the statue, opening a hidden entrance. Once inside, there's 3 corresponding saves to make with each mental stat, and as we succeed, we get a temporary +5 to each until our next long rest. This is especially nice for our charisma, making our chance to hit and damage significantly better. Then we head back to the gauntlet and pop in all the Umbral Gems we acquired to unlock the last door, revealing inside a portal to the Shadowfell that we descend into the depths of, trepidatious but ready for whatever dangers lie within. As we awaken, we get a glimpse of an incredible prison holding a lone figure called the Night Song at the bottom. But we're not the only people who've made it inside. Balthazar is still here and hurries down towards the bottom before us. We'll have to take him out before he gets the chance to do anything funny. So when we're at the bottom, we sneak up on him and steal the shiny speed potion sticking out of his pocket. Then we start the fight. He immediately kicks off by casting Animate Dead on so many corpses, but it's nothing the world's greatest counterspell can't handle. A couple turns later, Balthy jumps to an awfully precarious position on a floating rock, which we just can't help but take advantage of, and just like that, Ketheric's right-hand corpse is dealt with. Then we chat with the Night Song, and she very haughtily talks about how she'll forgive us if we let her go. Unfortunately, we really don't have much of a choice. So as we lay a hand on her shoulder, the Night Song is freed and reborn once again as Dame Aelin, the demigod daughter of Selûne. And just as soon as she's free, she's off to Moonrise to unleash her divine displeasure upon them all. Gunter shows up right behind her, and the Moonrise folks seem actually surprised that we betrayed them after they spent all that time belittling and demeaning us. And like that, it's Gunter and Shovel versus all of Moonrise. We start our first turn by casting Hunger of Adar in the narrow stairway that they'll need to get out of if they want to reach us. The enemy's turns are all spent just dashing into our spell, with some other questionable choices being made too, like a Cone of Cold being cast nowhere and this dude jumping to his certain death. When it's back to us, an Eldritch Blast almost gets casted, but a blinded Zarel decides to counterspell it. It's at this point we send in Shovel to slow him down a little while we backpedal out the door. Our loyal servant gets quickly brutalized with a black hole into a crit hit right after, but at least she lasted 3 whole turns. To make matters worse, one of the archers barely hits us and we lose concentration. So we run out of the hall and use our second spell slot on a second hunger. Hadar is a hungry boy after all. As they struggle to get through, we finally start picking him off with Blast, which trigger our Bloodlust Elixir and let us further damage whatever folks are foolish enough to be at the front of the pack. Some of these cultist cronies even died of the hunger itself on their way out. Even once they manage to get out of the harrowing hunger, there's little they can do to catch up to us thanks to our repelling blasts and frightens, meaning we just keep walking backwards and keep shooting away. Only problem is, once we get them into the Shadow Curse when they die, they come back as undead, though admittedly much less threatening undead. Just a few more rounds of this, with the Shadow Curse taking away their health as well, and they're all cleaned up easy peasy. There's some more folks waiting for us when we get back, but with a surprise prize round from Shovel, and with our resources refreshed, we're really not too worried. Our usual strat of keeping them at bay works out pretty well, and at one point one of them cast their own hunger to make our job even easier. Sure enough, the job is wrapped up here in just a few rounds with them unable to do a darn thing. We continue on upstairs afterwards and find our good pal Marcus guarding the entry to Kethric's balcony, so we drop our fave AoE spell and wait a moment for them to figure out it wasn't the wind that did it. This fight plays out almost exactly the same as the last fight since there's a choke point for us to hold. All we need to do is take out the Gaunt Goons and then the head honchos. When we finally reach the top, we find a very irate Kethric Thorm who is reeling with the fact that he is now very mortal. To add insult to injury, we exploit his weak little emotions by showing him the letter from his dead wife and convince him he should join her. Then Dame Aelin shows up to ruin the party and reignite Papa Thorm's fighting spirit, and so the rooftop showdown kicks off. The first attempt unfortunately goes pretty rough, but next go around we've got a better plan. We start by casting darkness on ourselves, since frankly there's just too many enemies to take hits from. Followed up with a speed potion fueled E-blast on the necromancer that summons yet more baddies, leaving everyone else to start wailing on Aelin, resulting in her taking a ton of damage, but she still lives long enough to miss Kethric a couple times. The next round is pretty similar, with us focusing on the necromancer and Aelin actually going down. Don't worry, she'll be fine. Kethric's hound does jump into our darkness and manage to land a hit, which is a little worrying, but our priority is still the same, and we even managed to finish off Sostera with our next blast. Now our new target is the dog, since his attacks deal quite a bit of damage and bone chill. Only problem is this is our last speed potion turn, so we throw another one at the ground to refresh, and it didn't work. I guess the darkness cancelled it out. Good to know. All this really means is we lose one turn, so to make sure the dog doesn't go for us, we get Shovel to take the hit, and still no one else dares to come in the darkness. A couple turns later, we take out the dog, and now we're feeling pretty safe to shoot the big Thorm and his necromites from the safety of our spell. That is, until Kethric jumps in and clobbers our sorry butts, though at least we've got a backup spell slot for just this occasion. Still, this has us a little shaken, so we start thinning down the horde in case that happens again. Only to make a complete rookie mistake one turn by bonus action attacking him and getting knocked prone by a shield bash, breaking our concentration. We somehow survive to the next round where we scramble out of the way and cast a scroll of black tentacles to deal some AoE damage. In response, Deadly Orders gets used on us, which grants everyone advantage on hitting us and ends up with yet more broken concentration. The spell did its job well though, bringing them low enough that we can take out 4 of them with just 2 casts of the best cantrip before doing our best to heal. Kethric does summon more necromites as well, but for whatever reason whenever they hatch they don't actually join initiative. So we spend a couple more turns taking out the 2 that remain in the fight before laying it heavy on the big guy himself, while engaging in kiting tactics. Aelin proves herself a useful servant by being the best at distracting since she gets up for free each turn. It takes quite a while, but eventually we do get him low, and with the help of a big old tentacle he recaptures the Night Song and teleports away. Well, I guess we just kind of watch. At this point the rest of the necromites kick into gear, so we spend a few rounds taking them all out too, which isn't very hard since by themselves they're not much to worry about. And we quickly zoom after Kethric into a big old hole that leads into an underground illithid colony, presumably where the Elder Brain our patron is seeking resides. There's plenty of intellect devourers lurking around that all give a bunch of XP, letting us hit level 8 right after entering. After a bit of deliberation, we wind up taking Fear for the spell we gain at this level. It's another concentration spell, but it can be a game changer in fights if used right, so here's hoping we get the chance in the future. We also gain another feat for which we take an ability score improvement, bumping our charisma up to 20 with the +1 from Ethel way back in Act 1. Before we chase down our weak-willed foe, there's something else in the colony that catches our eye, so we down a potion of invis to sneak past the many enemies and jump over to it. It turns out to be a puzzle, one that Gunter has no problem solving with his superior upper-class brain and higher education. Upon being solved, our reward is a brain in a jar that we can pop into a console at a different part of the room and actually speak to. And if we can speak with it, we can make a deal with it. It wants to be purged, and in return we get its memories along with a very special technique, the Githzerai Mind Barrier, a little permanent buff that grants advantage on all intelligence saves for the rest of the run. No complaints from me on this one, we're definitely happy to have it. Now it's time for us to descend into the depths to finally face the true leaders of this cult. As we arrive at the bottom, we find Kethric talking to Lord Enver Gordhash, a fellow notable noble, and Orin, a clear bloodthirsty ball spawn. Tensions are clearly high between the 3 of them, but together with with their nether stones, they're able to control the very elder brain that we've been looking to stop. After a brief talk and a bit of showboating, all but Ketheric disappear in a puff of smoke to head towards Baldur's Gate. Once they're gone, we have a chat with the big man ourselves and take the opportunity to remind him yet again of his dead wife, really twisting that dagger where it hurts. He takes it very personally and ends up sacrificing himself to the big old pit in the center, and who should come crawling out but someone else who's taken this all very personally. The Apostle of Myrkul, Lord of Bones, a god whose nobility, if we're being honest, is not nearly so great as our own. And thus the final showdown begins, and we really gave it a good few goes, but things kept going awry and it became clear for the strategy I had in mind at least, we just didn't have enough speed potions. So we went back to an older save and faced the real final boss of this act. 45 minutes of uninterrupted partial resting and then shopping, and then partial resting and more shopping. Our concentration waned and our courage faltered, but by the end our great trial had been conquered and we had a bag full of all the resources we could need. As a bit of extra prep, we also go to the Sharan statue in the gauntlet that we forgot last time, where we gain a buff that grants full necrotic immunity until our next long rest. Then we go through all the various fights all over again in much the same way to get back to where we were. Once that's done, we get prepping for the fight decently similarly to how we did it the first time, starting with an elixir of heroism. Then we use Armor of Agathis since we can get the spell slot back anyways. And of course we summon our loyal Hound Scratch as well as a full humanoid zombie from a nearby Intellect Devourer. Don't question it. Gear-wise, we replace our adamantine armor with the Dark Justiciar armor and Risky Ring with Crusher's Ring. When we're at the bottom, we gather our servants around and treat us all to a potion of flying, as well as a potion of invisibility, so we can get into position. Once we're all ready, we cast Darkness where Myrkul will spawn, which doesn't break invis, then we bonus action stab the nearby Mind Flayer to get a surprise round. As the fight begins, we send Scratch to rescue Aelin, while we focus on the Mind Flayer, since it can be absolutely deadly. Even our zombie gets in on the action, letting us down a potion of speed and finish off said Illithid on the next round, before laying into the Lord of Bones himself. Myrkul spends his turns doing the only thing he can since he's blinded due to darkness, Call of the Damned, a map-wide AoE that hurts all the enemies too, culling them down, including Isabel, who is also here since Marcus kidnapped her. While the Necromites fail to hit us at all thanks to our high ground and higher AC. After a few rounds of blasting him and refreshing our potions whenever we need to, all the Necromites he's been summoning get Myrkul's Call, meaning they'll start sacrificing themselves to heal the big boss, as well as let him cast Finger of Death. Darkness stops the finger, and a Bone Chill once per turn stops the healing, which is what we really needed the speed potions for. So as long as we stay on top of our darkness, as well as our health and our speed potions, we can feel free to use one action to Bone Chill and another one to blast away. This fight is essentially just a resource check for us, especially considering the unavoidable damage every turn. And unfortunately, it's one that we failed earlier, but now that we're more prepared, there's very little the Lord of Bones can do as we whittle him down. Now that's what a true Lord is capable of. Good riddance. Aelin shows up to double tap and make sure that Ketheric is gone for good this time. We grab the Netherstone off of his armor to celebrate. And Aelin asks if she can join our camp in the future. We're not too keen on having her around since she seems the sentimental type, but hey, maybe we can sell her to somebody or something. Either way, with one pillar of the cult dealt with, our patron is appeased for now and our curse is weaker than ever, so we set out towards Baldur's Gate, where there will no doubt be plenty of dangers and poor people to deal with. Thank you all so much for watching. I really, as always, appreciate the support you guys give. This one got a little rough around the Myrkul fight, but now I know patch 6 Myrkul is not to be trifled with. Either way, it was a good time, so thank you again, and a very special thanks to our Storyteller tier members, Bunny Warren, Player 5, Damon, Larry Renzokuken, The Big Yeet, LaFay, Mark Rainbow, Garrett Sapp, and Rat King.